if any of you decide you would like to buy a CD of the event, just for the audio as opposed to the movie, Ian's brought some down which he didn't tell me about, otherwise I would have had them on the door earlier. So if you want to buy them, they're £10 at the door or £15 at the museum. So there you are. And we're going to start off with 2 hornpipes. The first one is called number 1 and the second one is called number 2. I found out where they are. The first one is called Clasper's Hornpipe and the second one is called the Champion Hornpipe. If you notice, the accordion stops in this, that means the music has fallen off the stand. Well, often people never notice anyway. Right, Clasper's Hornpipe and the Champion Hornpipe.
secret why I was quiet in the corner while that was going on. It's because I had a look at the music over Johnny's shoulder, and it looks like a centipede with muddy feet legged across the staff. I'll get it off for when we're doing the stage, we'll be alright. Wait, what? But, you know, I expect great things. The Dolly, the Sweetie, and all that was a Joe Wilson song. Joe, I suppose, really deserves a mention of his own right. But I mean, there are a lot more Rowan songs in the various collections and books than we're going to sing tonight. And I mean, a lot of them follow the same course. Obviously, they just tell you about how the race started, what happened, and who won at the end. But Joe Wilson was a great observer. He was one of, in fact, the observers really of folk. And if Wynne had still been here, I would have told you that a lot of these rowing songs, they're about the people who lived on the south bank of the River Tyne, which in those days was still County Durham, you see, where I come from, you know. So Wynne's actually written a piece called Reclaiming the Tyneside Horseman, which will be out in all the local history magazines this next week or two. But Joe Wilson was a great observer, like I said, and this is perhaps his most, or one of his most famous songs, because he fell in love with a young girl on the other side of the river, in the Bridge End. And he used to spend his Saturday nights very shyly gazing across the room at this particular woman. And you know what Saturday nights are like, or they used to be like in clubs. You know, all smoky and beautiful, and you know, and he was forlorn, and his tongue was floating gently on a pool of spilt beer on the mahogany bar top. And his eyes were streaming with this, and he was thinking, and he couldn't. There's no way he had the courage to speak to her. Yeah, and I first heard this song sung by somebody who's not with us anymore, who deserves a mention because he sang it beautifully, and that was Don Stocco of Burton. And this is The Bonny Gates in Glass. No one you haven't seen me, lass, her name I wouldn't mention, for fear you can't tell her how I like it all, so I do. But it's just for lads and lassies to whisper their affections, and the bonniest lass in Gateshead's bonny face has me. Oh, well, the first time that I saw her, why, I'm sure I didn't know, though I felt I'd seen her face before, but couldn't think of where. Her blue eye met mine in passing up the high street in the morning, and our look was seemed to ransom that me heart was mainly there. Oh, well, I haven't seen her for a week, till one night at the Bridge End, when I strapped upon a go, and the gathers come away. She said that I was clumsy, and I said that I was sorry, and I humbly begged her pardon. I was late for what to say, but I walked on by my side, just as if I had the ring today. The conversation first was shy, then it turned first class. We both talked about the weather, and she mentioned that her father, he was a puddler down in Axis, me bonny Gates at last. Well, she mentioned confidentially that her uncle was a grocer, and his brother's father's cousin was a fiddler down the shore, and she was a dressmaker, and we got on so well together that I found I'd never seen a lass so charming like afore. And she said our mother kept a shop and sold head pies and candy, and our uncle was a cobbler in the high part of the town. She talks and makes and kindly, and she smiles so sweet and pleasant, that I blessed that happy hour when I strapped upon her gown. And I made her I laugh and slap me love, we're talking lots of nonsense. But bless you, when you're courting, there's nothing gonna pass. And I asked her what she'd be lass, and I take her out on Sunday, and to my delight she says, I'm right, me body is a lass.
Okay, I've just put up a slide of the funeral monument of Bob Chambers, seen Walker Churchyard. In fact, well, let's say Chambers died in 1868 after a long struggle with TB, and then Clasper died in 1870, but Clasper was already was semi-retired. He tried to have the occasional race, but he preferred to race against people who built their own boat. That was his stipulation. He was in with a chance then. And he would try and get someone who was as near in age to him as he could, but that was more difficult. So his last race, I think he was about 57, racing Matt Taylor, who was 39 or something like that. But he just loved it. But the next song, in fact, the rower that this song's about, I really don't know much about, but Johnny, when we were looking at songs to put on the CD, he said, well, I'll have a bit of variety, so the next song's called Alec Hogarth, Champion of the Weir. It's another Joe Wilson song. And it didn't really matter that I hadn't researched Alec Hogarth until tonight, when I'm going to talk about him. But fortunately, tonight we're on the Tyne, so I hope I won't get too much stick for the omission. But the song praises his rowing and his life-saving efforts on the weir. So I expect he was a waterman who had a sideline in acting as an unofficial lifeguard. This could be a lucrative activity for a reward of money, and perhaps a gold or silver medal was frequently given after such a rescue. James Renforth, who I'll come to talk about later and you'll hear some songs about, younger brother Stephen was rumoured even to have pushed people in so he could save them. And that was a member of the family, one of the descendants who told me that. Anyway, the Champion of the Weir is a nice title, but it didn't have the kudos of being Champion of the Tyne, or best of all, the Thames and the Tyne. So take it away for Alec Hogarth.
So the next time when he asks you if you want a nice quiet walk by the river, doesn't go. Lovely little chorus for you, and it's oh me lads, it makes me heart so glad to sing you all a song to please you here, and give a hearty cheer for the Champion of the Weir. Aye, a hearty cheer for Alec on the Weir. Just do the last line if you like, in Sunderland let's sing, watch and make the whole ring. It's a song that's sung all the lands to cheer. For it gladdens every tone when the natives gain renown, and I'll sing of the one that stood sea on the weir. And it's oh me lads, it makes me heart sing glad to sing y'all a song to please your ear. Then give a hearty cheer for the Champion of the Weir. I'm a hearty cheer for Alec on the Weir. There's not one that's pulled an oar on his day or before that was better like than Alec Hogarth here. For he's one among the few that's been always game and true and straightforward. He's the Champion of the Weir. And it's oh me lads, it makes me heart so glad to sing y'all a song to please you here. Then give a hearty cheer for the Champion of the Weir. Aye, a hearty cheer for Alec on the Weir. The east foremost of the brave, whenever there's life to save, and there's many a hostess they've been sad and drear. If it hadn't been for him, when for life up the heat swim, and the bravery he displayed upon the weir. And it's oh me lads, it makes me heart so glad
read that, but never mind. The next song's about one of the sort of second tier of oarsmen, Teasdale Wilson, and this is a cutting from the Newcastle Daily Chronicle announcing his death in April 1870, and the Newcastle Daily Chronicle was the paper where all the rowing reports went. If you wanted a contest, you put a challenge in there, and everything to do with rowing was reported there. Reports of the big races would run to 10, 12, even 16,000 words, so huge reports. But this is rather a sad report on Teasdale Wilson. He was a well-liked waterman who was from the city, from within the walls around Sandgate. And the song seems to be a jaunt through his defeated opponents, Hope of Blythe, Thomas Matfin and Richard Clasper, one of Harry's sons. And it seems this song was written when Teasdale Wilson had been rowing for a while. He began his career around 1858 and he only gave up when his health became too bad. His last race was in 1869. Perhaps he had TB or maybe lung cancer. He had to give up his work and descended into poverty, and he was trying to look after an elderly mother and a blind sister as well. At the very end, he was reliant on the charity of his fellow rowers and backers, with collections held in the pubs, known as the sporting houses, where the rowers gathered, and they were various pubs, about half a dozen pubs, something like that. So let's hear about Teasdale Wilson.
Now you've heard of Teasdale Wilson, he's a keelman down the shore. They call him the city champion, 'cause they never had one before. In a keel or a coble, he'd give any man a race, for 25 pund a side, and toss for a choice of place. Now he's a Sandgate lad, the bloomin' city champion, so lads, get your money on, ye may depend upon, wherever he rows he always goes, the whole hog on on. I mind when he rode a coble race, we hope he doon it Blythe. The race was for 100 pund, and hope he did strive. But the Sandgate lads, they shooted hard, Teasdale was blan about, and the porter pokeman did say, he's the gamest lad that's out. For he's the Sandgate lad, the bloomin' city champion, so lads, get your money on, ye may depend upon, wherever he rows he always goes, the whole hog on. I meant when he rode Matford, now this again he won. You'd have been amazed had ye been there and only seen the fun. Matfin, he fell out of his boat when he was 2 lengths short. When folks they said about Teasdale, he laughed till he nearly burst. Aye, but he's a Sandgate lad, the bloomin' city champion, so lads, get your money on, ye may depend upon, wherever he rows he always goes, the whole hog on. He licked young Dicky Clasper tea that caused a sensation. 'Twas 2 to 1 on Dick that day, for that there was nae occasion. My Dicky took the lead at first, till they come to the old shot tower. Teasdale shot away ahead, now isn't he the cure, because he's a Sandgate lad, the bloomin' city champion. So lads, get your money on, ye may depend upon, wherever he rows he always goes, the whole hog on. I can tell you plenty Mary licked, for he always did the trick. They presented him with a watch and chain, and I hope to that he'll stick. So long may Teasdale flourish, and to win it always strive. The Sandgate chaps, they all declare, man, he's the gamest man alive. He's a Sandgate lad, the bloomin' city champion. So lads, get your money on, Ye may depend upon, wherever he goes, he always goes. The whole hog on the hog.
The next rower that was prominent after Chambers was James Renfrew, who was, well, they say he was of Gateshead. Actually, he was born in Newcastle, and possibly he was from Durham.
Heads in your backs there.
Anyway, he claimed to be from Gateshead, and I think he moved to Gateshead when he was about 1. So, but Renfrew was from a family of smiths, anchor smiths, heavy work on either side of the river, really, in the ironworks there. And he himself was a smith striker from when he was about 13, 14 onwards, just swinging the hammer, really, while the smith would position the work, then he would swing the hammer. And it obviously made him a strong lad. He seems to have enlisted in the army several times and been brought back. Eventually, he enlisted in the East India Company at the time of the Indian Mutiny. And then by the time he got to India, the mutiny was over, and they were given the choice to come back home. So he came back home. That got translated to all kinds of weird stories about him going to the West Indies and so on. But eventually, I managed to tease out that he'd gone to India with the East India Company. You can see how it kind of gets to the West Indies. And he came back, and he was in the reserves for the next 10 years. Well, it would have been 10 years, but he deserted in 1869. But that's another story. He was world champion by then, and I don't think they were probably that bothered. I put this slide up in particular. It's quite bright, but he's wearing his colours around his neck. They would issue colours. They would publish colours, a bit like CDs, really. It's another way of making money. They would publish the colours. They were big silk handkerchiefs, almost a metre square, with a design on them, and they were the equivalent of the replica shirt today, except that they cost a guinea, which was about a week's wages for a working man at the time. So you can see, really, the replica shirts are quite cheap. Yeah, that's it. So there's Renfrew with his silk scarf round his neck, or silk handkerchief. We've got a number of these in the collection at the museum, and my wife used to be the costume and textile specialist at the museum, and I remember getting one out one day, and she suddenly roared at me. She said, "That's been round the neck of a sweaty rower." And sure enough, you could see the marks where it had been rolled up and then tied in that fashion. So it's a sort of special in a particular way, that one. But anyway, Renfrew got a job rowing men and materials when the old Tyne bridge was demolished, before the swing bridge was put in place, and about that time he started to row. He'd been a swimmer for a few years, racing for money. He began to row in 1866, and he very quickly was reckoned to be a very strong oarsman. And having started in 1866, only had a few contests. He won the championship of the Thames and the Tyne on the 17th of November 1868. And he was so feared as a sculler that it was difficult for him to get matches after that. He never defended the championship in the 3 years between winning it and dying in August 1871. Anyway, before he gets to die, we're going to sing about him as the champion, another Joe Wilson song. I'm sure this song will have been written immediately after Renfrew's victory for the championship over Harry Kelly. It's characteristic of a rowing song in that it gives a short account of the race and pays tribute to other famous oarsmen. They might well be in the audience, so always best to give them a mention. And the dead ones will still have supporters, so you want to keep them on side. And also to Renfrew's coach, James Taylor, and then finally the catch-all. And the boat pullers are round Tyneside. So, you know, you've got your whole audience with you. It's a typical crowd pleaser. So, Renfrew the champion.
for producing great men. Look at Armstrong and Stimmies and Tyne. Iron Granger that made our fine tune what it is, and its buildings that around you agree. Both the building of boats and boat pullings were pride, and where we try hard for to shine. And Renford, the brave hardy son of the north, brought the championship back to the Tyne. Brought the championship back to the Tyne. Now we lost poor Bob Chambers, and sadly we grieved. There was none but what laid on us Bob, and we sighed for another to fill up his place, though we knew 'twas a difficult job. Then Redford came out like the man that he is, for the honour of Tyne side, and to stop him from taking Bob Chambers' place, the whole world he bravely defied. And the whole world he bravely defied. Then a challenge was sent, and a match there was made, with the best London champion there's been. That's brave Harry Kelly, the pride of the Thames, and a finer race never was seen. For with confidence pictured on each manly brow, the north and the south meet again. They're ready, they're off, then the struggle begins, and the crowd roar and cheer for the men. And the crowd roar and cheer for the men. Encouraged by cheers from the friends all around, the boat striving hard for the lead. And then the North Countrymen shook with delight, the sea that pecked fortune ahead. Though Kelly, a man as game as can be, spurts hard to catch Jimmy, but nay. The Tynesiders are there with both courage and skill, and strength for to lead all the way. Aye, and strength for to lead all the way. The championship's won, and it's brought to the Tyne, a river made famous with men. Like Chambers, the Calaspers, Bob Cooper besides, Jimmy Taylor and Percy, so then. Good luck to Jim Renford, and may he maintain the honour he now has for pride. And good luck to his trainer, Jim Taylor, as well, and the boat pullers all round Tyneside. And the boat pullers all round Tyneside.
When we won the championship, nobody wanted to row or scull against Renford in a single scull, and then they didn't want to race against him in a pair either. So he began to race in four-oared crews, and then nobody on this side of the Atlantic wanted to race against him even in a four-oared boat. So he had to drum up contests to keep the money coming in, and he eventually went with four-oared crews to race in Canada in 1870 and in 1871. He was very successful in 1870, and they were expecting victory in 1871. This is the crew that he took with him. That's Harry Renford's on the far right, sitting down there. Harry Kelly's the man with a big dark beard behind him. Get on to the next slide. And this is quite a rare photo, really, of them actually in their boat training. 1871, it's early to have an action photograph like that. By this stage they got rid of the coxes, and the bowman was steering with his feet. The race started, huge crowd, massive amount of money, about I think £5 million or something like that, bet on the race. And Renford collapsed in the boat soon after the start and died an hour or so later. The news came to Tyneside by telegraph cable, and everybody was stunned. This song, The Death of Renford, by Roland Harrison, picks up on that and also paints a little sketch of Renford. He definitely wasn't much of a conversationalist. You can hear from the verse about his skills in company. So, Death of Renford.
It was the same as having Alan Shearer snuff it, you know, when he used to be able to play football. So I suppose it would have a huge effect on Tyneside. Roland Harrison was a great songwriter like Joe Wilson, but didn't get much recognition until recently. But he was always up there following the news, and he had a great skill. And this is one of the rare songs that's a lament that he wrote. There was thousands waited eager to tell you the news coming. Everyone was certain war Tyneside lads would win. The paper sellers shook their heads, their faces all turned red. Me blood had run quite powerless when all I read the lad was dead. To see him walking round the town, we would have thought of that. He'd crack and give you time of day with his bonny white felt hat. Ran forth the king of the scullers, we'll say is like the mayor. He was the pride of old Tyneside in a forward race of air. If you met him in a company, well, he hadn't much to say. He would hear the conversation in a kindly sort of way. If a joke was passed, he'd twist his face or give a quiet laugh. He never was the first, you know, to start away and chat. He was looked up to by all sorts that looked down upon my name. There's many a heart felt very sad since poor Jimmy's gone. Ran forth the king of scullers, we'll never see him more. Mind he was the pride of our Tyneside in a forward race of air. His races were the fastest time, wherever he might be. He died away from all his friends, parted by the sea. If he had been at Yem with us, it wouldn't be so bad. He'd never been defeated, or canny Tyneside lad. Jim Renforth, the king of scullers, we'll never see him more. He was the pride of our Tyneside in a forward race of air.
Just running through a few slides of relics of Renforth. This is his funeral monument outside the Shipley Art Gallery. Used to be in the Gateshead East Cemetery, and it shows Renforth collapsing back into the arms of Harry Kelly, which is what happened during the race. However, we don't really want to finish on this note, and I can't remember what the last slide is. Well, that was the last slide. So I think we're just going to go straight into something a bit more cheerful when Johnny's found what he's...
Well, one of the things we found out looking and research about Renforth is he played for the Durham Regatta. And of course we found out there was a tune called the Durham Regatta, and it was written on the very handkerchief he used to wipe his brow after he had run. Because he just happened to have a handkerchief with manuscript paper on.
Like you would.
And a passing bystander who'd won a lot of money on him pulled out his manuscript pen and wrote this hysterical hornpipe in the key of G. The trouble was he wasn't very good at time signatures because it looked like F sharp plus 2 minus 12. And he put that on the dogs the same night and it won. And then the second one is a rare hornpipe from one of the more remote collections that actually went across to America, and Matt Seaton found it, and it's called the Champion Number 2. And of course, Renforth was the second champion. So, looking at the time when the hornpipe was written, it was just about the time when Renforth was popular. So I says, that must be the tune, even it sounds like God Save the Queen. There are one or two things that Ian hasn't mentioned about the scullers, and that one of the things which amused me was often when they decided they were that good, they would do them something, give them something nice, you know. The way you have a nice lolly when you've been good when you're little. And he used to buy them pigs. And so they would end up working in a pub, and then they'd get so unfit that they had to run the pub into the ground and give it to somebody else, because the manager would say, "You're getting too fat. Get yourself back out and have some steak pies and get to the high street." And they used to train in some of the pubs in Gateshead, and people used to go and they would keep them in the pub, but they used to lock them away and not let them have any beer. And they'd come down the pub stairs and take them away running along Dunstan, and then go back and feed them on steaks. And I've asked Ian if this is possible for folk singers. But he says no.
Only if you wear the costume, Johnny. Only if you wear the costume.
I'll wear the costume if I get the
Free food and drink.
While he's wearing a costume, put me down for the stage.
Okay.
Forget the run.
So, one of the things we've been interested in is, because fiddles were so popular in pubs in the time that these rows were on, Colin's been studying very carefully the pub fiddle style. And he's often had to look among the sawdust for remnants of fiddle bows and things like this. And he's had to concentrate on not playing properly, which is a hard job.
It's a proper style. There's a
Yes.
tutor by a man called Honeyman, and he illustrated various styles of bowing, and one was the Newcastle style. So I've been playing it tonight already, so I'll play it again. It's a question of just playing across the rhythm. That gives it a bit more lift to it. I hope, anyway.
And a hand free for your paint.
And I've been told by a person over here, Paddy, that the Newcastle style of fiddling always comes out better after they've beaten Nottingham Forest. You got the news?
And if you want the tunes, by the way, there's a good book produced by the Northumbrian Piper Society called The Tunes of James Hill, and you'll find all these tunes in that little book there. So there we are, there's the second.
John Regatta and the Champion Number 2. Well, thank you very much for coming and making this a great night. I think we've all learned something. We've learned that that tune just needs about another 10 notes in. It'll be impossible. But particular thanks go to Ian, who was the start of all this, because he had all this information. Benny and I had looked at these tunes and collections and often thought, be nice to tie them all in, but we didn't have the background information. And when you get all the history, it's just a fascinating story. So thank you very much, Ian. And thank you very much. And if you leave quietly, nobody will ask you to get on the boat and row us back to Scotchwood tonight. So thank you all for coming. The club will be open in a fortnight's time.
That's right.
And anybody who hasn't chopped their eggs or broken them by then will be examined as they come in and offered the chance to do it on the spot. If you want to know what's happening about the club in the future and the guests, if you see Dave, is he going out? And we have got some Champion O's CDs left, haven't we?
Yes, yes.
Okay then. Well, thank you all for coming and a safe journey home. At least you'll be able to park in the city from now on until next week.